It's the year 2000, specifically November 2nd, 2000. The first crew to take up residence on the International Space Station has just arrived. Charlie's Angels is one day away from premiering, and the controversial 2000 US presidential election is just 5 days away. But on this day, an internet user by the name of timetravel_0, who 2 months later would start going by the name John Titor, makes a post on an obscure forum site and makes some outrageous claims.
Greetings. I am a time traveler from the year 2036. I'm on my way home after getting an IBM 5100 computer system from the year 1975.
In this and subsequent posts, the individual goes on to describe the nature of his time machine, various aspects of time travel itself, and future calamitous events like a global nuclear war. He answers questions and posts pictures and diagrams of his machine, and he also shares a number of predictions, some of which come true, some of which don't. And then, in March 2001, he disappears, leaving his acolytes to pick over what remains of his stories. John Titor is today considered one of the most well-known time travel hoaxes in internet history. But in this video, I'd like to examine the nature of his claims and what they tell us about our own future and our own past. Let's get started. Did you know that flavored air devices are quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking? It's an entire new movement towards better habits, led by today's sponsor, Fume. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that fills the void ditching a bad habit can leave. You'll still have something to reach for. Fume draws flavor to your mouth through a passive diffusion system, but doesn't use vapor, meaning you can use it anywhere. No nicotine, so it's not addictive, and no batteries, so you'll never have to charge it. The device looks awesome, is perfectly weighted, and incredibly fun to fidget with. If vapor were compared to sticky soda, Fume cores are closer to herbal teas. They've got lots of delicious flavors to choose from, like crisp mint and orange vanilla. Based on my channel name, you can probably tell which one piqued my interest the most. Fume is backed by doctors in the US and has served over 300,000 customers. You can be their next success story. For a limited time, use my code OrangeRiver to get your free topper, the perfect accessory for your Fume device. Slip it onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. It's chewable for those who love to fidget and is reusable. Head to tryfume.com. That's tryfum.com and use code OrangeRiver or scan the QR code on screen to get your free Fume topper when you order your journey pack today. Now, back to the video. We'll start with a little background about Titor himself. We'll get to who might have been actually behind the account in a bit. In his posts, Titor claimed to be an American soldier based in Tampa, Florida. His upbringing took place in a version of the United States that is markedly different from our own, at least as far as the timing of one of the most profound historical events to occur this century, the Second Civil War. As Titor described, in his history, a level of constant civil unrest began in 2005 in the wake of the previous year's presidential election. This civil conflict included Waco-style events every month that steadily got worse. Eventually, the unrest was, quote-unquote, at everyone's doorstep, and the country erupted into full-out war by 2008. The United States was split into 5 regions based on various factors, including deferring military objectives, already getting into some Hunger Games territory. During this time, the US presidents strove to act as a sort of Lincoln figure, but their policies were divisive and undermined the Bill of Rights. The Civil War culminated in 2015 in a brief but intense World War III in the form of a nuclear exchange between the US and Russia that killed 3 billion people. Washington, D.C. and Jacksonville, Florida were among the cities hit with nukes, and the U.S. capital was moved to Omaha, Nebraska. Over the next 2 decades, society slowly recovered, and as an article by The Telegraph puts it, the aftermath Titor described is like what Republican survivalists imagine America should be. Titor wrote,
In 2036, I live in Central Florida with my family, and am currently stationed at an Army base in Tampa. The people that survived grew closer together. Life is centered on the family and then the community. I cannot imagine living even a few hundred miles away from my parents. There is no large industrial complex creating masses of useless food and recreational items. Food and livestock is grown and sold locally. People spend much more time reading and talking together face to face. Religion is taken seriously, and everyone can multiply and divide in their heads.
No child left behind. According to Titor, time travel was invented in the year 2034 thanks to breakthroughs in high-energy physics at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. In his words,
offshoots of certain successful fusion reactor research allowed scientists at CERN to produce the world's first contained singularity engine.
This engine design involves rotating singularities contained within a magnetic field that each put out about 300 to 500 megawatts. Altering the speed and direction of their rotation enables a user to travel forward or backward in time. The precise science behind the operation of such a machine honestly deserves its own section, and I'll touch on that in this video. After this technology was discovered, Titor wrote, General Electric began manufacturing so-called displacement units. This device would become very important to the United States government, as in 2036, there is a looming threat to what remained of their technological infrastructure, the Unix Year 2038 problem. The Unix timeout is a real concern, by the way. In a nutshell, at 3:14:07 UTC on January 19th, 2038, computer systems that use 32-bit integers to count time will enter what is called 32-bit overflow, and their dates will roll over to 1901. This is expected to cause certain operating systems and software to malfunction, although 64-bit systems, which are becoming common, won't suffer from the year 2038 problem. Similar circumstances surrounded the Y2K bug, which actually did temporarily bring down commercial software and devices, but obviously the world didn't end that year. Well, not because of Y2K. But in Titor's time, what was the US government's solution? Well, clearly, this is a problem that could only be solved through the use of time travel, recently a patented trademark of GE. Titor's task was to travel back in time to 1975 in order to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer needed to debug the aging machines still used in 2036. To be fair, it should be noted that government agencies are notorious for using outdated computer systems. For instance, in 2002, NASA had to buy old medical equipment off eBay to scavenge obsolete Intel 8086 chips for their own booster testing machines. But the kicker is that Titor needed the 5100 for a special feature that was not publicly announced by IBM, that the computer had the ability to emulate code between different programming languages. This was actually a real feature that IBM kept secret, as the company was worried how their competition might exploit it. But even if it had been kept secret, most people in the year 2000, or any year, wouldn't have such intimate knowledge of the IBM 5100's inner workings. This points to the likelihood that the person behind the John Titor username was a computer scientist of some sort. Titor said he was chosen for the mission because his paternal grandfather had been directly involved in the 5100's original assembly and programming. Okay, so Titor is sent back in time to retrieve an old IBM computer that can debug legacy computer systems in 2036 that are subject to the Unix timeout error. But Tyler, you might ask, nay, scream, clawing at your device. If he went back in time and then went forward in time, wouldn't he change the timeline? Indeed, the timeline must have already changed, because America didn't have a civil war that started in 2005, nor have we had a nuclear apocalypse. Yet. Also, why was he making forum posts in the year 2000? Well, the answer to the latter question is that, in his words, he decided to stop over at the turn of the millennium for personal reasons. Pretty conveniently, I might add. In retrospect, his posts can be seen as a warning. That we averted civil and nuclear war is a testament to his supposed power to change history, seemingly for the better. But in order to arrive back at his own version of 2036, or indeed to arrive in 1975 or R2000 for that matter, John Titor had to hop across world lines. He explained that, in his time, it was understood that the Everett-Wheeler model of quantum physics, also known as the many worlds interpretation, was essentially correct. Under this model, time travel to the past doesn't result in causality-breaking paradoxes like the grandfather paradox, but instead, a new timeline is created that runs concurrently to the traveler's original history. Titor described his journey thusly. He would start in World Line A in 2036. In order to reach 1975 to acquire the IBM computer, he would turn his machine on and jump to another world line, B, with about 2% divergence from A. Already, I want to pause and clarify that according to Titor, even if you're traveling backwards in time, the world line you arrive on is already going to be different from your past. If the journey is less than about 60 years, 2036 minus 1975. Oh my God, he done it. The divergence is calculated to only be about 1 to 2%, but past 60 years, the confidence level drops substantially. For instance, if he were to travel back 2,000 years to meet Jesus, there's a better than average chance he'd end up in a world line where Jesus was never born. This path can be visualized as traveling through a cone. The farther away from the center you are, the more differences arise on the world line. Anyway, after turning the machine off, he would create a new world line, C, just from being in B. After retrieving the IBM computer, he then travels forward along C to the year 2000. And after turning the machine off again, he starts another world line, D. We live in D world.
Okay.
I'm gonna keep that in, I swear to God. In order to get back home, he'd have to go back on D until he reaches C, which in turn takes him back to B, which in turn takes him to a point before he arrived on B, then he could go forward from the point he arrived on B, and then back to A.
I hate temporal mechanics.
So, those are the mechanics of traveling between world lines in a quantum multiverse. But what about the actual physical components that made up his time machine? Well, Titor described the time machine as a stationary mass temporal displacement unit, powered by two topspin dual positive singularities that produced a standard offset Tipler sinusoid. You know, as is typical of most General Electric models. Titor's unit was called the C204, and in addition to the two singularities inside a magnetic housing, it featured the following components: an electron injection manifold to alter the mass and gravity of the microsingularities, a cooling and X-ray venting system, a variable gravity lock system, 4 cesium clocks, and 3 main computer units. Because of the mass of the system, Titor had to store it in the trunk of a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette convertible, evoking the image of Doc Brown's DeLorean from Back to the Future. On part of his return journey, he wrote that he would need a 1987 truck with 4-wheel drive. Get it? 4WD? Forward. This was because he needed a vehicle with a strong enough suspension system to handle the weight of his distortion unit. And no, we're not talking about his dick. And the vehicles had to match their respective time periods. He described traveling through time as like driving under a rainbow, followed by driving through a tunnel and being in total black. The gravity field generates a steady force of 1.5 to 2G, and the user feels a tug towards the unit, similar to rising quickly in an elevator. The user also needs an extra oxygen supply to withstand the heat during travel. The unit's operation generates a slight hum and crackling from static electricity. Definitely not inspired by Back to the Future. When the time machine leaves, the vehicle appears to accelerate as light bends around it, and observers must wear sunglasses to protect from a short burst of UV radiation. This is followed by a static discharge, with the air rippling as if it were getting denser. The machine moves solely through time rather than space, and vibrates loose a large chunk of ground, taking it along for the ride. Standing too close to the machine can be dangerous due to venting radiation and the strong local gravity field. From the perspective of the future, travelers are only gone for a split second before they return. The most important part of the time machine is the variable gravity lock system, or VGL. It keeps the machine and passenger fixed in place in their environment so they won't end up floating in empty space or fusing with any solid objects when it arrives on another world line. He said the unit
takes a reading of the local gravity and samples it during the trip in pulses. If the gravity is too far off, the unit stops or reverses itself to the last sample period where the readings were correct. If there's some sort of failure, the unit shuts down and drops out to wherever you may be.
The Tipler sinusoid is a reference to physicist Frank J. Tipler's calculations for a solution to, presumably, the electromagnetic wave equation, one of the bases for many worlds theory. It locks onto the local position and holds the traveler to Earth, so to speak, and it must be stationary because of the sensitivity of the gravity sensors, since any accelerated motion would throw off the measurement from the singularities. Speaking of these singularities, Titor described them as forming a localized Kerr field, referring to the Kerr metric, a solution to Einstein's field equations that describes rotating, uncharged black holes. I talked about the Kerr metric in my video about the Bajoran wormhole that nobody fucking clicked on. Supposedly, because of the particular shape of their event horizons, there are vectors that allow one to approach the singularity without being crushed by extreme gravity. One of Titor's lengthier posts mentions all of this, plus Penrose diagrams, Hawking radiation, and such, but that's the gist of it. Because Kerr black holes are normally chargeless, adding charge to them, according to Titor, increases the diameter of their inner event horizons, thus adding mass and increasing their area of gravitational influence. The computers and clocks are pretty self-explanatory, working with the VGL to plot the machine's course through time. Again, not at all like Back to the Future.
So we've talked about where Titor came from, what his mission was, and how his time machine worked. But the question remains, how plausible were his predictions? This might seem like a silly question given that I've attempted to demonstrate that this is, of course, widely understood to be an obvious hoax.
In fact, an IP address associated with Titor was geolocated to Kissimmee, Florida, and a private investigator concluded that entertainment lawyer Larry Haber and his brother Richard, a computer scientist, were likely the men behind John Titor. The name was first introduced in 1998, accompanied by predictions about chaos surrounding the Y2K bug. A multimedia artist named Joseph Matheny also claimed in 2018 that he had worked as a consultant for unnamed individuals responsible for the John Titor legend, which was a literary experiment in the vein of other early internet conspiracy theories and alternate reality games, like Cicada 3301. Ooh.
But the thing is, many of Titor's predictions are scarily accurate.
Okay, sure, not the Civil War and World War III stuff, nor his warnings about a mad cow disease pandemic, or his prediction that the Olympics would be canceled after 2004, or the LHC coming online in 2007. Yeah, he got a lot wrong.
But as Titor's most diehard fans would point out, his writings contained something of a get out clause. That is to say, because he was traveling across different world lines, there was no guarantee that events would follow the same path. Not only was this a clever explanation of the consequences of the Everett Wheeler model, it was also a convenient way to make all of his claims unfalsifiable. But Titor got a lot right, or at the very least, a lot of his claims turned out to be prescient.
He seemingly predicted the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster, although he of course doesn't specify which shuttle had an overheating problem, nor the date this would occur,
keeping it just vague enough for plausible deniability.
He predicted closer relations between China and Russia and the West's growing instability, giving China confidence to expand, although this is arguably something that could have been extrapolated by keen observers of international relations at the time. He did correctly assess that China was close to putting a man in orbit, which happened in October 2003. Interestingly, he predicted deception leading to the Iraq War, specifically that the US government would use false reports about weapons of mass destruction to whip the public into accepting the next war.
While this was indeed accurate, it was also the kind of foresight that somebody paying attention to foreign policy at the time could have come up with.
Of course, he did miss 9/11, which is kind of a big deal. His predictions of nuclear war hit especially close to home as tensions with Iran continue to grow, and indeed, in 2015, Turkey shooting down a Russian plane over Syria is probably one of the most recent nuclear close calls we've had. And Titor did describe the Arab-Israeli conflict as a milestone on the way to World War III, which is reminiscent of the current escalation between Israel and neighboring powers in the 2020s.
But one of Titor's most disturbing predictions is one that didn't even come true, but is maybe starting to. America's descent once again into civil war.
The decline of Western civilization is one of the central themes of Titor's story, and it's been underscored by the loss of constitutional freedoms under the Patriot Act and similar legislation. The poor economy since the Great Recession, the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street protests, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, the George Floyd protests, and other events have all marked growing civil unrest in the United States. And today, the ongoing crisis at America's southern border, in which red states are sparring with the federal government for control over immigration policy, is just the latest in a series of events that many feel are leading the country closer to civil war.
Anyway, the lesson here isn't, hey, look at this fraud claiming he knows the future, or let's make fun of his acolytes, although the second one I actually encourage. It's, hey, look at this creative work of fiction that does what all good sci-fi stories do, shed a light on the problems of today while warning us about what our future could be if we don't choose a different path. The fact that we avoided civil war in the 2000s is, according to Titor's fans, a testament to how we do have the ability to take control of our own lives and guide our own fates.
Titor occasionally derided the people of 2000 as
lazy, self-centered, civically ignorant sheep.
Apparently a common view of the time period among people in 2036. Arguably, there are still plenty of sheep around, but maybe this time we can avoid the worst outcome again and craft a better tomorrow.
With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron or member at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description. Or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. By becoming a patron or member, you get access to awesome perks like behind-the-scenes photos and videos, patron and member-only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation. All are appreciated. Links to my PayPal, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description too. And big thanks once again to Fume for sponsoring today's video. That's all I have for this week. And remember, don't trust your microwaves. Testes, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me do that one more time. But in order to arrive back in his own version of 2036, or in order, never mind, the first one was fine. I want to leave. Okay. I want to leave. This is, nobody's going to watch this video.
It's okay, me and Andrew will.
That's all I have for this week. And remember, don't trust your microwaves.
That's so good! That's so good!
Oh man.
Oh, that's
all right,
so good.
you can cut.
Captain's Log, Stardate 81001.35. We are minutes away from the launch of the vessel of which I've been assigned command, the USS Endurance.
Captain on the bridge.
Take us out, Ensign Makara.
Captain, we're getting a hail from Starfleet HQ.
The colony at Garani is experiencing severe tectonic instability.
By the prophets!
Sir, more incoming vessels dropping out of warp near our position. They're Tholians.
Evasive maneuvers.
Sir, the anomaly is growing at an accelerating rate.
I've got wounded coming in already!
Joshi to bridge. Impulse engines are showing major mechanical stress.
¿Qué demonios?
You don't believe in fate.
Lieutenant Hugon, I'm putting you in charge of handling incoming refugees.
I can do it, sir.
My people slew our gods centuries ago. Let's hope hers are with us today.